happens next? Winemaking, part 1. This is a 3-part series, and we're going to be dealing with this fermenter so we can see what happens to wine when it's fermenting. I'm Mark Stanley, author of Creating World-Class Red Wine. First of all, I love fermentation. I get really jazzed up when I get to ferment. There's so much going on in a fermenter, all the chemistry and bubbling and wonderful smells. So this fermenter we have 1,600 pounds of Pinot Noir in this fermenter, and we didn't crush them, we just destemmed them. So what we've got going here is a whole berry fermentation, which is appropriate for Pinot Noir. If this was Cabernet Sauvignon, I'd want to see these berries be popped. Each berry, I'd want to see it be popped just a little bit. I would never want to overcrush. It brings out all the harsh seed tannins and brutalizes the skins of the grape to where you get a lot of harsh phenolics. You know, I shall fear no tannins, and yet I'm wise about it. Pinot Noir has a lot of tannins in the skins, but we want to extract them very gently. If you overcrush Pinot Noir, you can end up with a wine that's harsh and tannic, and no one wants to drink it. And I've done that years ago. So if you have one of those crushers, those Italian crushers that either have a hand crank or there's a motor on it, the hard plastic rollers that are non-adjustable, the cluster goes through the rollers first and then it's destemmed. And it just shreds the grapes. It makes a real mess out of them. And you might be a pretty good winemaker, but if your finished wines are kind of a little hard edge when they're done, you can't get rid of it. You can't change if you overcrush. It'll always be there. You can't fix it. And for home winemakers, destem by hand. It takes time, but your wine will be better. And if you think, sometimes you end up with a whole berry if you destem by hand. If you think you need to crush more, then stop. Go ahead. I know you're laughing. Go ahead, laugh. You're laughing at 10,000 years of winemakers. The foot action is actually a soft action that they designed the rubber rollers system based on the foot action. So here today, we're just going to press down. These grapes are at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius. We got almost 23 bricks. That's about 23% sugar on these grapes, and they're at 3.38 pH. So we're in a cold soak right now, and I'm going to press down. That's all I'm going to do. I just need to wet the cap. I want to make sure the cap stays wet so that there's no place for the bacteria to find purchase. Technically, cold soak is called pre-fermentation maceration. The grapes are soaking in their own juice, so it's a water extraction of the phenolic compounds in the skins. And the macerationist part means that the grapes are macerating, they're falling apart very gently with the water extraction. So we're pulling out a lot of blue color from anthocyanins in the last 3 or 4 epidermal layers of the skin of the grape when we do a water extraction. Later, once the must begins to ferment and we have alcohol in here, the alcohol will pull out a whole different set of phenolics. And we'll get more red color from the alcohol extraction. It's all about gentleness, especially with Pinot. But I'd be doing the same thing with Merlot or Syrah, Tempranillo, Cabernet Sauvignon. You'd just be pressing down. So when I'm done, it's not too hard here. I'll just tamp it down. I'll just do it the way I show you here. But I tamp it down so that the surface is hard and there's less surface area for the grapes to be exposed to the oxygen and the bacteria that's in the air. Now this simple technique is one used by almost every quality winery in the world, wineries that make wine over, say, $50 a bottle or so. What happens next? Part 2. We're going to be pressing down again, but the wine will change. So please come back for part 2. What happens next? Winemaking, press down and punch down. Today, it's day 5, it's Thursday. We destemmed these grapes on Saturday, and we're still in press down, but we're starting to see a little bit of natural fermentation, which is a good thing. We're going to inoculate with RC212 yeast tomorrow, but it's okay if we see a little bit of natural yeast, at least according to me. What goes on with the natural yeast fermentation? Well, compared to when we use RC212, we'll be using one yeast species, where with natural yeast, there's sometimes 3 or 4 different species of Saccharomyces that are acting in the wine. They go through their life cycle in succession. It's kind of like a relay race. And right now, we're just starting to see a little bit of action, and it's only 61 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty low temperature for yeast to start, but they are. So the first yeast to start is a low temperature yeast that is not very alcohol tolerant, but it likes acid. So as the must ferments, the acidity goes down, the pH goes up, and different yeasts have their life cycle. The last one being Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is alcohol tolerant. So that's what happens in a natural fermentation. But with natural ferment, we notice with this vineyard and with other wines I've done it with, it adds a bit of complexity to the wine because of all those different yeasts. But it also adds a bit of softness in the palate. But we're going to use RC212 this year on this fermenter because it gives us a little bit better color profile and perhaps some better bouquet. But today I'm just going to press down again the same way I did before, but the cap is starting to look a little different. It's starting to get drier. And so now I'm going to start pressing down. Not much drier. I can smell a little bit of yeast. I can see it looks different. And I can hear just the very starting of the snap, crackle, and pop. I can hear it. But that's all we do today. We're still pressing down. Once this starts to really ferment, and it gets so dry that we can't do this anymore, we'll be punching all the way through. So every fermentation has natural yeast going on inside. There are some home winemakers that claim that 30 to 50 parts per million of potassium metabisulfate that we add to the wine when we crush the grapes kill the native yeast, but that's not true at all. What it does is it slows down the bacteria. Bacteria are much more sensitive to sulfur compounds than yeasts are. So we put 30 to 50 ppm in here, and that slows down the bacteria and it allows the yeast to dominate. And the yeast will dominate. The yeast are like the Borg. They will take over. That's what we want. So that's what we're going to do. But first we're allowing the natural yeast to do their thing a little bit, and then we're going to add our RC212 tomorrow. So please join us for part 3 to see how this progresses in What Happens Next. Welcome to What Happens Next, Winemaking, Part 3. I'm Mark Stanley, author of Creating World-Class Red Wine. And we've changed our game plan. We were just going to press down today, but we decided to inoculate with yeast. Welcome to winemaking. You never know what's going to happen. You have to be flexible. Making wine is a little bit like raising a child. The French term for it is élever, or elevate. And so, like, let's say the child needs to have her diaper's changed. Well, you're not going to say, well, can we schedule that for, reschedule this sometime? No, you can't do that. And it's the same way the wine is. We decided that this was the time to inoculate, so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to inoculate with a Pinot Noir yeast, RC212, and we have Pinot Noir in the fermenter. But first we're going to use some GoFerm, which is a rehydration nutrient. It's not a standard complex nutrient that you put in the middle of the wine. You just use it when you're rehydrating the yeast. So what happens is the yeast, to use the analogy of a child again, it's like waking the child up in the morning. The yeast is dehydrated. And so we're going to put it in some water. You're going to give the child some water, and then 20 minutes later, she's going to be hungry. So, but actually, in this instance, we're going to feed her right as we wake her up. So I'm going to mix in, we're inoculating 5,400 pounds of Pinot Noir, which is 400 gallons. And so I'm using 500 grams of GoFerm, which is GoFerm is a nutrient. Like I said, it's just for rehydration, and it's listed organic by Swiss standards. It's very popular today. So I'm going to mix it into the water that's in this bucket. And this particular yeast recommends 95 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit or 36 degrees centigrade. So I actually have the water at 104 degrees because when you put the GoFerm in, it cools it down a little bit. Each yeast has a slightly different profile. So I'm going to mix this in. It's going to be noisy, so I'll see you back after I get done mixing it in. Well, the GoFerm and water solution is at 99-37 degrees right now. So I'm going to add 400 grams of yeast to it. And so I'm going to add the yeast, and then I'll meet you back here in 20 minutes because we're going to wait exactly 20 minutes for the yeast to rehydrate. If you wait any longer than that, it's not a good idea. It's like feeding the child, you give her the water in the morning and then she gets hungry. The little girl's going to get crabby, but she's nice. The yeast, this is the Borg. Once they get hungry and you don't feed them, they're going to start looking for a protein source, and they start considering feeding on each other. Cannibalism. I hate it when that happens. So meet me back here in 20 minutes. I'm going to stir the yeast in, and we're going to wait.
Action.
Okay, the yeast has been hydrating for 20 minutes. We're going to put I'm going to dip into the fermenter and get some liquid must out of the fermenter and add it to the yeast solution. Slowly. That's not very much. Now this is 63 degrees to Fahrenheit, and this is, well, let's check it and see where we're at. Yeah, let's check the temperature, because we want to step this temperature down closer to the temperature in the fermenter. We don't want to shock the yeast. We want to be nice to the little heathens. I've got about 90 degrees Fahrenheit here, so that's good. But I'm going to add some of the liquid must to it. I don't want to shock it any more than 10 degrees. That's what they recommend. I like to be a little softer than that. Try to work in maybe 8-degree increments. What did that get us? Oh, the yeast is smelling good. Oh, we're still at 87. So we can put some more in. So I'm going to get some more sugar for them. We fed them some nutrients, and now they're going to get their sugar. We're getting some nice color out of this Pinot so far. So here, let's put a little more of this in. So once again, what I want to do is if we started out at here at about 90, so I can go down to theoretically 80, but we're at 84. I can put a little more in. And I don't know if you can see the yeast on the top there, but it's starting to, it looks like it's liking this sugar addition. You can see the foam starting to happen. Yeah. So what we're going to do, so we've just stepped it down from 90 to 82. So I'm going to wait 5 minutes for the yeast to get used to the lower temperature. We want to be nice to them. Stir it up a little bit, and I'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Let's see what the temperature is now 5 minutes later. Oh, look at that action. I love RC212. It's hot stuff. We're still at 82. So I'm going to put some more juice in. Wow. Nice. Like that. There we go. We're at 70, 75. I accept that. Now we'll wait another 5 minutes. This whole procedure is described on page 99 of Creating World-Class Red Wine. Yeast rehydration. Okay, before we add the yeast to this fermenter, we're going to wet the cap. Yeah, we got a little fermentation going here. We're going to make sure that the cap is wet for the yeasts. So I'm just going to do this over the whole thing. Yeah, the cap's getting drier. You can see it's fermenting naturally. That's okay. I can hear it. So let's inoculate, shall we? There's different ways of doing this, but this is the way I like to do it. Just pour it, spread it over the top of the cap. A little more. I'm not a big advocate of mixing it in. And then I'm going to go around and wet the cap again. And that's it. So the yeast is just sitting on the top and it's going to populate down nicely into the wine. Tomorrow this will just be cooking. So that concludes part 3, inoculation of yeast. We've got this fermenter all put to bed with a sheet on it that we keep on most of the time. And so what happens next will be part 4. We'll be into vigorous fermentation, and that's when it gets really fun. Welcome to What Happens Next, Winemaking Part 4. With the Pinot Noir, we're into full punch down now. The wine, the must is at 10 bricks, and I'm going to punch it down. Out of habit, I start on the left side when it's stiff like this because I've worked in bigger fermenters with larger punch down tools where it's hard work. So I start on the left. Oh, this isn't too bad. So I can slice up through. Oh, this is nice. Look at that. I just work my way across. Sometimes it's a lot stiffer than this. Look at that. Nice stuff. Full punch down. We don't need to over punch. We just need to mix it in. Submerge the cap. We've got a few whole clusters in here. They're coming up. We put them in here on purpose. Yeah, got some whole clusters here. You can see this. So the clusters are starting to ferment inside the berries. It's a bacterial fermentation. Carbonic maceration. That'll add some special character to the wine. Now when I'm done, I'll do the same thing that I did. Pack it down really nicely. Reduce the surface area. And then we can put it to bed. First today, I want to talk about two things. One is complex yeast nutrients, and the other will be kinetics, fermentation kinetics. We're probably not going to add any complex yeast nutrients to this wine. We already put Go Ferm in here, and these grapes were only 22.8 brix, which means they probably have a lot of onboard nutrients in the grapes. The riper the grapes get, the less nutrients they have. But we bought some Fermade O anyway. The main old school winemakers use diammonium phosphate, DAP, which is basically lawn fertilizer. And the university still preach the use of DAP. There's a lot of DAP in Fermade K and Superfood, and those complex yeast nutrients work. They work fine. But about 5 years ago, I switched over to all organic nutrients. Fermade O was the first product that came out from Lallemand Company, and now there's more products. I've used NutriStart Org, and this year I used WHO, W-H-O, a organic complex yeast nutrient out of California. Now none of these have DAP in it. Diammonium phosphate could cause runaway fermentations that don't finish to dryness. It's sort of like a shot in the arm. It's like junk food for the yeast. To use the analogy of the child again, it's like sending the child off to school and having her go to the convenience store for breakfast. So I've had a lot of good luck with the organic nutrients. They're expensive, but that's what I use. I also want to talk about fermentation kinetics. Right now, this wine is hot, about 86 degrees, and that's really a good peak temperature to shoot for. That's kind of the standard high temperature to shoot for in a fermentation, depending on who you are and where you are. But what I like to see is, when I do it, I chart it on a page. So every day I'll have the temperature of the fermenter, and then every other day the pH, and maybe the brix, so I can watch the brix go down, the pH go up. But more than anything, I want to see the temperature have a nice gradual rise and hit a peak temperature, generally 86 degrees, and then slowly back down. I want to have a nice, even kinetic curve. So the the extraction happens naturally and slowly. With this particular fermenter is a double wall dairy vat that's insulated, and so it gets hot. It'll be cold for a long time. The fermentational curve will look like this, maybe 67, 72, and all of a sudden it'll be 86 degrees and 90. And then it'll drop off really slowly. So it'll produce a different tasting wine than the fermenters behind us. So it's a good idea to try to keep your kinetics even, and it's okay if it hits 90 degrees. You just don't want to go much above that. It can kill the yeast and get a stuck fermentation. It's never happened to me, but someone I know it's happened to. So, well, this fermentation is going along nicely, and we're going to punch down the rest of these fermenters, and that's the end of part 4, winemaking, and what happens next. And much of this can be found in my book, Creating World-Class Red Wine. I'm Mark Stanley. Thanks for showing up.
Where can I get the book?
Amazon.